Welcome to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast, where we help women struggling with recurrent pregnancy loss by sharing stories of hope and interviews with experts in the field of fertility and miscarriage. If you want to download our free lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, you will go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to download your free checklist. If you want to connect with others going through recurrent miscarriage, please check out our show notes for a link to our Facebook group. Now I'm going to hand it over to your host, Laura Bowder, for today's episode.
Welcome back to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast. Today I have Sheri Johnson here with me, and Sheri is a miscarriage and fertility coach. Sheri, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I am delighted to be here.
I am so excited that you're here to share your expertise with us as well as your personal story. So could you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do in your coaching profession and why you wanted to come on and share with us today?
Yeah, sure. I have a coaching business. I do one-on-one coaching with women who are looking to recover emotionally and physically from a miscarriage or from a period of infertility. And so I specifically focus on either one-on-one coaching, or I have an online program, a 6-step journey through emotional recovery from miscarriage. So that one's just specifically focused on miscarriage, but I do one-on-one coaching for fertility too.
Okay. And that is all done online, or do you have in-person clients as well?
Well, since COVID started, I haven't really been doing too many in person, but I do. I have a bunch that I've done over Zoom.
Okay.
So, and that actually works quite well.
Yeah.
But the online program is primarily self-directed, and then we have a couple of Zoom calls also through that.
Nice. And I know that this business was kind of came to be because of your own personal experience, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Someone said to me, your mess becomes your message. And
Yes.
that really kind of resonated because it certainly did for me.
Yes. So what were you doing before you started this business, and how did that transformation happen for you?
It was a bit of an evolution. So I worked in human resources. I was at a big company, and I had already started to take some steps toward leaving that industry and was doing courses in nutrition. And so when I worked for BlackBerry, so everybody got let go from there eventually, or mostly most of the people. So I got let go. And when I did, I was kind of ready to take the next step and start my business. And it was just prior to that I had had my first miscarriage. And you want me to jump into this story?
Sure.
The first one?
Yep.
After my first miscarriage, I actually had a missed miscarriage. And I didn't want a DNC. That just wasn't the direction I wanted to go. And so I sought out eventually a naturopath. And she provided me with a tincture that helped to release the sac. And that moment, it didn't resonate with me like consciously in the moment, but that really made me believe that what I was doing with my nutrition actually worked, that natural solutions could work. And that led me down the path of, moving more towards hormone balance and women's health issues in my nutrition practice. And then eventually that evolved as well. And I really honed in on, after I had 2 more miscarriages, on miscarriage and fertility, because my miscarriages also came with a long period of infertility.
Mm-hmm. And so after your first miscarriage, you kind of had this realization that nutrition was important, and you were more focused on some of those like naturopathic remedies. How did that carry through as you experienced recurrent loss after the fact? Like, did you do different things along the way, or anything to potentially try and figure out why that might have been happening?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I did everything. Um, I changed my diet. I mean, I did everything that I could that I learned from my nutrition program. There's
Mhm.
also, my program was a holistic nutrition program. So there was a spiritual component to that as well, and an
Mhm.
emotional component, and how much stress impacts your fertility. So that came into play. I went to a Chinese medicine doctor. I went to a naturopath. I kind of did everything I could from a
Yeah.
physical standpoint. Yeah. I went
Were
to a therapist,
yeah.
everything.
Were any of their answers or potential reasons like satisfying to you? Did they resonate with you, or was it always like, that's not it, there's something else?
That's a good question. Um, some of it definitely did resonate. I noticed a big difference after I went to a Chinese medicine doctor, and she gave me this horrible tasting tea. But I actually noticed differences in, like, she definitely did something to change my hormones. Things that I didn't even know were wrong with me that suddenly were fixed. And I noticed a difference, and I didn't even realize that there was something not normal about that in the first place.
Mhm.
Um, so I definitely noticed a difference with that. I noticed I felt better from a stress standpoint after having acupuncture. So that helped a little bit. But there was a point where I remember I was doing too much. And I
Mhm.
think I'm trying to remember when exactly that was. I think it was even after my second miscarriage. Um, and I hadn't had my period in months. And I remember that my acupuncturist had said, "Do you want to try, what if we try this?" And I just was at the point where I thought no more.
Mhm.
And I actually remember going for a walk and mulling that over, like, why am I resisting this? And what is it, that where am I? What am I doing with all of this right now? And
Yeah.
something inside me just said, just let it go. Like, just love your body again, and drop everything else. And my period came the next day, which
Oh, wow.
was, mhm. I think I just felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders, and that's what I needed. So there
Yeah.
was, things that resonated, but then moments where I just thought, oh no, I think it's something else. I need to move forward, and just, maybe it's just self-care at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can look so different for everybody too. And, um, when you experience a miscarriage or you're experiencing recurrent loss, it can be so easy to really kind of get down on yourself and be critical of your body. And yeah, those can be really like toxic emotions and feelings to be carrying around.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, the body, I didn't even realize how I was feeling towards my body. And suddenly I was able to recognize that and changed it. And that made a huge difference. We carry around this hate for our bodies, and this separation between us and our lady parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, what do you think about, like, what are some, because you work with a lot of women who have had recurrent miscarriage or who are dealing with infertility, are there certain patterns of things you see that tend to work really well for the women that you work with? Or on the flip side of that, mistakes that you see commonly, or things that you have to focus on frequently with your clients?
Yeah. So I'll tell you about a couple of mistakes. And they were all mistakes that I made as
Hmm.
well. And then I can answer the first part of your question
Hmm.
by saying what I did differently and what I do now. Um, so, one mistake, I assumed that getting pregnant again was going to make my grief go away.
Yes.
And I think that's many women out there, especially if this is their first loss, or they don't have other kids already. Yeah. And I needed to actually heal myself, emotional health. I didn't really think about that. So
Mm-hmm.
that was one thing, that assumption. Another thing that I did, I sort of pushed away all my emotional pain. I threw it under the carpet. Um, I went back to work. I kept myself super busy,
Yeah.
all of that. And I later realized that that wasn't really working. And it, all that grief was just resurfacing in other ways, not necessarily sadness, but anger and irritation, and all these other emotions were coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was mistake number two, was just assuming that, avoiding it was going to heal it.
Right.
And that wasn't the case. If I took things, if I took control over my healing, then I could actually control the release of it,
Yeah.
of that pain. And then the other thing was waiting for time, just assuming that time, we hear that all the time, time heals all wounds, and it
Right.
doesn't actually, doesn't at all. So what I did instead of those three things later, when I
Mm-hmm.
realized that that's what I was doing and it wasn't helping, taking control of my healing myself. And I used some different tools. I eventually discovered the power of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I used journal writing, which I still do. Essential oils I discovered, I think, just before my second miscarriage. And all of those were things that I then started to bring into my own healing practice, and really found that I could make a difference that way. I could uncover, what's beneath this trigger, and what's this pain really stemming from? What's this feeling? What's the root of all of this pain that I'm feeling?
Mm-hmm.
And that made a huge difference. So taking control of your own healing, taking action towards your healing, I think would be the biggest piece of advice I have for women. Don't just sit back and wait. Um, and don't just assume that your pain is going to go away if you avoid it. You have
Mm-hmm.
to take some action to heal yourself.
I think that's such a good point. And I mean, I can totally relate to the feeling of like, okay, well, if I just get pregnant again, it won't hurt anymore. I'll feel
Yeah.
better about this loss if I can just get pregnant again. Um, and ultimately, like, was I excited that I was pregnant with my son? Of course I was, but like I still had all of this emotional baggage that I was just sort of carrying through my whole pregnancy with him and my postpartum experience. And like, yeah, looking back, I mean, taking the time to actually heal and actually grieve a loss probably would have served everybody in my life much better in the long run.
Yeah, I think that was my experience too. I got into my second pregnancy and was completely anxious about it. I was excited, but I couldn't let myself be completely excited because I was guarding myself. What if it happens
Right.
again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's common, don't you?
I think it is. And I think it's either, it's like, it's women think that, or they just think, okay, I'm going to avoid it all. I'll go back to work. I'll throw myself into something else, a hobby, or, a relationship, or even other kids or something like that. Um, just something to avoid those feelings.
Yeah, I did an Instagram poll on that. And
Mm-hmm.
do you know how many women go back like to work right after? They don't even take a day off.
I would, being
It's
one
a
of
lot.
them, I would guess it's a lot.
Yeah, I was too. I went back to work the next day. I
Yeah.
don't know what goes through our minds, but
Uh,
yeah, taking that time for ourselves to process and grieve,
yeah.
it's important.
It is important. And it's something I wish, I think I had obviously had so many emotions after experiencing that, but I think one of the things I was thinking was, first of all, like, it's going to be a huge pain to reschedule all the meetings I have that day. I'm going back to work, and then I have to act like I'm fine because I can't tell anybody that this is what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep. We did a huge restructure at Blackberry the day after my miscarriage. And I remember coming home from an ultrasound and my boss was texting me saying, "Can you get on a phone call?" And I was like, "Oh, I really don't want to." But it turns out that they were I got on this phone call, and it's him and another VP, and they're restructuring my job completely and putting me into a new role. And I'm sitting there, coming home from an ultrasound where they've just confirmed my loss, trying to process that and this whole job change. And then I thought, I have to go to work now
Right.
because I need to see what this is all about. Like, a whole bunch of people have lost their jobs, and I'm in a new job. I need to go meet my new boss. And yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so important to process loss, and
Mm-hmm.
this is like a special kind of loss. Like if you lost a living child, or if you lost a family member or a close friend, like you would tell work, like, I'm not coming in, I'm dealing with this. But we
Mm-hmm.
don't do that with this.
No. And to me, it's actually, somebody else said this, and I use it a lot. It's a death that occurred inside of us.
Yeah.
So it's the most intimate kind of death that is possible. And we don't give it enough. I don't know what the right word is. We don't give it enough credit. Like, we don't honor it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when you're working with your coaching clients, what are there any differences between, like, what sort of mindset shifts, or what kind of clarity are you working on with them? And is there a difference between if you're focusing more on a woman who is coping with recurrent loss versus someone who is coping with infertility?
That's an interesting question. So to answer the last part of your question, it's interesting, but there isn't really that much of a difference between what they need to process. Um, Infertility is a type of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so the types of things that are going through their mind are very similar. They have similar triggers, right?
Yeah.
Like pregnancy announcements, birth
Yes.
announcements, baby showers, all that stuff. It's the same. And every period is like a loss for someone
Mm-hmm.
who's going through infertility. So while, my online program is focused on emotional recovery from miscarriage, but I use the same process, the same steps with my fertility clients as well,
Mm-hmm.
and in my one-on-one coaching. And so it's very similar. We start with a really quick overview of my process. We start with self-care, so taking care of yourself and really learning how to support yourself. Most of us expect our friends, our family to support us, but there's actually a lot of ways that we can just support ourselves. So that's a piece of it. Forgiveness. We talked about that earlier. Forgiveness of
Yeah.
our bodies, of the people around us who don't know how to support us, our partners, our friends, our family. Then there's a kind of making peace with what has happened. And for a fertility client, that's kind of around making peace with already what has occurred, and then being able to move into the next phase, which is encouragement and taking the next steps and moving forward, which can be really scary for anyone on either of those paths. The future can be scary because they have a vision that they don't quite want to actualize. Like, they want it so badly, but they're so afraid that it might not happen that they don't want to even put words to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are kind of, it's reconciling the past, but it's also moving forward, finding reconciliation with your partner, because there's usually a lot of resentment there. And ultimately being able to experience joy again without feeling guilty, feeling joy unapologetically, which is also hard to do when you've had a loss, to really just sort of let loose and feel the spectrum of emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's such a good point about the partner work also, because it, like, it's, I think at the end of the day, like, women feel like we are suffering most of all, which, you know, is likely true. And we feel these things and we have actual physical things going on, but the partner has to watch it happen, maybe doesn't feel as connected to the pregnancy depending on how far along it was, how long they knew about it, or just, obviously isn't physically connected to it like their partner is. And I actually did an interview for this show with a father who was on that side of the recurrent miscarriage, and it was really interesting to get kind of his perspective on the different ways that he grieved that situation compared to his wife and how they had to kind of reconcile those. So when you're working with your clients on like considering their partner and working through that, what kind of advice would you give for just being like whatever you do as far as partner work, like being open with your partner or accepting of the fact that everybody grieves differently, or like what kind of things should women be thinking about when it comes to their partners in this?
It's hard to give a short answer to that one because there's so many facets to it.
Yeah.
And each woman has a different relationship with their partner.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I mean, it sort of comes into play at every step of my process. Like in self-care, it's about dropping the expectations of other people, including your partner, to support you, and how to find that support within yourself. In the forgiveness phase, it's finding a way to forgive if they didn't support you the way you thought that they should, or if they moved on quicker than you did, or there's all kinds of different things that can come up. I went through all this physical stuff, but you got to just sit by and watch. So there's all kinds of feelings that need to be forgiven. And forgiven is about releasing. It's release for yourself. It's not about the other person in most cases. We talk about how to really drop that resentment, and we get into some really deep, like journaling always helps. That I guess that would be a really quick answer is write about what you're feeling.
Yeah.
If you want something like actionable, write about how you're feeling towards your spouse. Go back to how are all the ways that he did or she did support you in past. Why are you together? Write them a love letter, even if you never give it to them. But finding that, going back to that space where you used to be with them, and writing about all the other stuff as well, and what's beneath that. So asking yourself, what's bugging me about this? What's the niggling behind that? And that journaling it's shocking what will come out on the page that you didn't even realize was in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I hear that advice even in like business spaces or like something completely unrelated to this kind of thing, but like they're really encouraging journaling right now as just kind of a way to get all of your thoughts out there and process things. And it's something that I probably need to try more. But I think in some ways, like people process things differently. Maybe writing is easier for some people, speaking is easier for some people. I think like for me, it almost feels worse to like see it written, and but some people really benefit from releasing things that way too. So it's kind of just like knowing yourself and what works best for you.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I just had a guest on my own podcast, and she was teaching about art journaling. So it wasn't about writing at all. It was actually drawing or painting or it was, she gave some journal prompts and then suggested paint something about that, like
Oh,
paint the
yeah.
rainbow. What does rainbow baby mean for you?
Mm.
And that was really an interesting way of doing it too. So it's
Yeah.
each person's different and what they most resonate with, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good idea.
Mhm.
I lost my train of thought now because I'm like thinking about art journaling. So let's see. What was I going to ask? I don't know. It'll come back to me. Here was my question. So when you are working with your clients, like there's probably such a range of emotions and like depending on where they are in the process or how recent their loss has been, um, what do you recommend, or what are some things that the listeners could think about? I'm thinking of like everybody processes things differently, and ultimately people come to different conclusions about their fertility in the end. Like some people will just decide not to have children at all. Some people will decide they want to keep trying. Some people will adopt. Like, how do you kind of work somebody through that process of just thinking about, like you said, like releasing the past, accepting like this is what has happened so far. It was different from what I anticipated, what I was hoping, but how do we, and I know this is also something that you can't answer in a short answer because I'm sure this is like your entire program, but like what can we think about when we're thinking about how do we move forward from this? Like what decisions about our fertility are best for us?
That's a really good question. And I'm thinking about one client in particular because that was a big part of why she came to me, was because she was really having trouble making decisions about her future,
Mm-hmm.
whether she should try. She'd already had a loss. Should she try again? And she was at odds with her husband about it. They weren't necessarily on the same page. And it was the second part of the process. I mean, it was the second part of the process that really, I think, got into that for her. So
Yeah.
having moved through the first part and making peace with the past is an important way to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to make decisions until you've released some of the emotion that's all tied up with what has already happened.
Yeah.
Because let me give you an example. If you have had a loss and you are so afraid of having another loss, we say that's, I'm afraid to get pregnant again, but really you're afraid of the pain of your last loss. So if you haven't processed that pain, then it's going to be really hard for you to make a decision about whether you should get pregnant again,
Mm-hmm.
because that fear is going to overcome the decision. Once you've actually processed the loss and you've gone through that forgiveness and found ways to find support and acknowledge your pain and sat with it and released it, then you can say more objectively, okay, do I really want to get pregnant again? Is it that I want to be pregnant, or is it that I want a child? And if it's the latter, then you can start thinking about some of the other options like adoption or surrogacy or whatever the physical issue is behind your infertility.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does come down to releasing the pain of your first loss or your prior infertility. That's going to allow you to then make your next decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's so many reasons to really work through and process like all the emotions that come with this. Because
Yeah.
they're big decisions, like how you're going to move forward from this, and very, they'll impact the rest of your life, what you decide from this. So it's, I think, important to give it, that, I don't know, probably the same word you were thinking of earlier that I can't.
To honor it and
Honor it.
to give it
Yeah.
that time or that
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Something else that I was thinking about too was um, I was so impacted by what everybody else thought and
Yeah.
what society throws stuff at us continuously that, when are you having your next kid? When are you having a kid? And all over social media, it's all about, motherhood defines me. And so you start to want something that isn't necessarily what you truly want. It's what you think you're supposed to want.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I think we need to get through, and journaling helped me through this as well, was
Mm-hmm.
what are the societal beliefs that I'm tapping into here? And kind of identifying that allowed me to strip it away and
Yeah.
get to what I really wanted. And in the end, we decided not to have kids. Not because that was what I really wanted, but what I realized once I stripped all that stuff away was that I could live with that. We did
Mm-hmm.
actually have a really nice life, and we were good with remaining childless. And we have a nice life now. So that all came through journaling for me as well, and
Mm-hmm.
meditation. Um, yeah, so that's something that I would tap into as well through journaling if someone came to that with that particular issue to me.
Yeah, no, that's such good advice. And we can be so influenced by what other people think, whether it's family members or friends or the things that we see on social media, which is like, social media is so great because it offers like, virtual connections and support, but there is that other side where you're seeing, everybody else's highlight reel and how awesome motherhood looks. And it's not all that glamorous sometimes, um but yeah, there's just a lot of I guess like a lot of different stimuli coming in that are kind of telling you what you want, and I don't know that all of us really take the time to question that. So I think like journaling, if that's something that resonates with you, or the art journaling, I think really getting in touch with like what it is that you want and what you want out of life, and just kind of going from there. But like we were saying, I don't think you'll get that clarity if you haven't processed what has happened in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 100%.
So that's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
So what would be, um, just to kind of sum up here, like your biggest piece of advice? Like we have talked about, processing the past. We've talked about different ways to um, think about how you're going to move forward. Maybe what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone who is listening and they're thinking like, okay, yeah, these all sound like things I should do, but I'm just feeling really stuck right now in, whether they're stuck in grief of a loss or stuck in being angry at their bodies because of losses or infertility. What would you suggest?
As a starting point, I'm going back to, just take some action,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how small that is, so that you can see or experience some progress.
Yeah.
So it goes back to taking your healing into your own hands, because we feel stuck when we're waiting for something else, from something outside to happen and to heal us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's taking one small step on your own towards your own healing. So for someone, for one person, that might be, okay, I'm just going to take care of myself today, and I'm going to draw myself a nice bath and give myself some time to just sit here with whatever it is that's bothering me. For someone else, it might be picking up a journal. For someone else, it might be picking up a paintbrush or throw on a guided meditation. Just take some small step, whatever that is, take an action, and that will move you from stuck to progress.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
That makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think we've talked about, through this interview, we've talked about lots of different options. So just pick something that resonates with you and take that first small step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where can the listeners find you if they want to connect with you online?
So I do have a private Facebook group, and I post lots of tips just like this in there. And we have a community, and people can post, what's going on with them that day and that sort of thing as well. So that's the group is called Miscarriage, Love, and Loss. So that's just the extension, Miscarriage, Love, and Loss. And then on Instagram, I'm at Miscarriage, Love, and Loss, and is spelled out. And then my website, sherijohnson.ca.
Great. Well, Sheri, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your expertise with us.
No problem. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I know that you have a resource that you wanted to share with the audience as well.
Yes. Do you have show notes you'll post that in?
Yes. Everything will be in the show notes. Yep.
Okay. So I have I have two actually. So I'm going to throw both of them out there.
Sure.
One of them is a meditation. So for those that resonate with meditation, it's a guided meditation to release the pain of miscarriage. And then I also have, for those who prefer more of a PDF, I have a trigger release. So it's a guide to releasing triggers.
Okay. Yeah, so those will be in the show notes, and maybe one of those will help you with your first step in moving forward. So thank you, Sheri.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our show notes for details on joining our Facebook group and for following along on Instagram. If you would like a free recurrent pregnancy loss lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, that's miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to get your free downloadable checklist. And for even more resources, visit the Miscarriage Hope Desk website, where we have stories of hope plus an entire library of evidence-based research articles related to fertility and miscarriage. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it if you rate, reviewed, and subscribed to the Miscarriage Hope Desk podcast. Your ratings and reviews will help others to find us. I want to wrap up by saying that if you are going through a miscarriage, my heart goes out to you, and as difficult as your experience may be, I want you to know that you are not alone and that you will find a path forward.